Sydney, not Nova Scotia. Sydney, as in Sydney Haymans. Sydney was one of the youth at the community center back in the 90s. And if there's anything that Sydney did, Sydney made me laugh. Sydney made everybody laugh. Sydney had been part of our program since he was 6-7 years old. Had come through our children's program and then became one of our teen program members. A permanent fixture at the center. He was always the biggest person in the room, not just in size, but because of his larger-than-life personality and his even bigger smile. The only trouble he ever gave us was that he would never stop being funny. And he made the world around him a better place to be. In one early summer morning, 2 days before he turned 18, however, one of our volunteers found him in a pool of his own blood on the sidewalk, not 100 meters from Double Take. Someone had shot him in the head. A probable case of mistaken identity, the police said. He had left his grandmother's apartment early that morning to go to summer school that was located at the other end of the city. As devastating as Sydney's story is, it's a story that does teach us a little bit about peace. Because it's a story of a vision for peace. Because Sydney and Sydney's mother and Sydney's grandmother were all looking for a glimpse of a city whose builder and maker is God. They were residents of a neighborhood whose history included a long list of violence and continues to. In 2001, the year that Sydney was shot, there were 5 murders in Regent Park, more than any other year on record. But since Sydney's death, his mother, Yvonne Beasley, now attends every single funeral of victims, young men who have been victims of violence here in our city. She and other mothers like her have a vision for peace for all the citizens of our city. They've started an organization called You Move, United Mothers Opposing Violence Everywhere. And so often at the different funerals that take place and afterwards they will have marches, reminding all of us that there's a better way. And this paper is simply an attempt to put into words what these mothers already know in their hearts. The message is that we must look and learn to look beyond the here and now circumstances and catch a vision of how life should be. It's a vision of wholeness for every person who lives in the city, and it's a vision that we call shalom. Most often here in North America, from a 2016 standpoint, we tend to have a very limited understanding of what peace or shalom is. We simply are looking for our little island of serenity where we can find our little peace in order to recharge our spiritual batteries. Or we look around at the world at large and we see all the violence and wars that are taking place, and we hope and we pray for the absence of war and violence. But is there something deeper behind this understanding of peace that we need to grasp a hold of? Well, God helps us along this path of discovery as we read the Scriptures so that we can begin to establish a whole new understanding of peace and then commit ourselves towards it. And so first of all, we start with the Old Testament. And the Old Testament has that word shalom. In Arabic, salam. And here's where we begin to get a slightly different perspective on what peace is. Peace oftentimes, as we said, is used in regards to violence. But in the Old Testament, out of 250 references, only about 60 of them are in reference to the absence of violence. Other parts of the Old Testament are referring it as a greeting or a welcome or a farewell or as a blessing. Other ones are in reference to the relationship that we have with God. And it's a desire to experience a fullness of life where all is well in every aspect of a person's whole being. In the physical, in the spiritual, in the emotional, in the mental, in the intellectual, and in all the social traits of all humans, we have this desire to experience peace. And like the mothers who have lost their sons, they have a hole in their life. And you and I have holes in our life. And what we are doing is we are looking to fill those holes. We are looking for wholeness in life. W-H-O-L, as opposed to H-O-L-E. And so when we talk about shalom, we are talking about this desire, this goal, this movement towards discovering wholeness, a wholeness within ourselves, and a wholeness in our relationships, and in a wholeness in our communities, and in our wholeness in our relationship with God. And so it goes far beyond this absence of violence understanding. Sometimes it's translated welfare. In our context, we too often use the word welfare in a negative connotation. But rather here it's saying to seek the wellness. Do you fare well today? Is the question that we should be asking. To wish someone shalom implies a blessing on their life. To withhold shalom, conversely, implies a curse. The blessing is that we would have unimpaired relationships with others where there's no longer anything that causes separation between the two parties. The general meaning behind the root word SLM, because there are no vowels in the Hebrew, is that of completion and fulfillment, of entering into a state of wholeness and unity, or of restored relationships. That restitution has been made, debts are paid, and reconciliation has been accepted between the two parties. The payment of a vow completes the agreement so that both parties can then experience shalom. And once that obligation has been met, wholeness is restored. It's the same thing as we look at our relationship with God as it's described in the Old Testament, this covenant relationship, that we make a deal, there's a pact that God comes in and says, we are together. We are one. We are unified. There's a wholeness to our relationship in spite of all that may separate it. And there's the well-known blessing of Aaron that's found in Numbers chapter 24, or 6, verses 24 to 26. It says, you know this. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. That is shalom. But we have a negative story of shalom in the Old Testament. We have a number, but in particular I want to highlight the story of King Saul. And King Saul was given directions by Samuel as to how they were to go and wipe out the Moabites because of their treatment of the Israelites. I'm not going to focus on that whole issue at this time, but they were supposed to kill all the cattle, kill all the sheep, and take possession of everything, and nothing was to be left living. And when Samuel came to visit Saul after the battles were over, he heard the sounds of animals. And he said to Saul, what's going on? Why do I hear animals? And Saul says, we saved the best for God, and we're going to offer them as sacrifices. And as he was lying, the soldiers were dividing up all the animals amongst themselves and not fulfilling the message, the commands that God had given them. And so Samuel says to Saul at that moment that God has removed his blessing from you. God has removed shalom from you. And from that day forward, Samuel no longer saw Saul. And Saul, it says, an evil spirit entered his mind. And so in chapter 17 of 1 Samuel, we have the stories of Saul and his troubled mind, and they look for a musician who will come and bring solace to him. And that's where David enters into the picture, as he becomes the one who brings some solace to Saul's troubled mind, because Saul is now without shalom. There's a number of other stories that talk about the positiveness of shalom. In particular, I want to pull out one that is a little bit different, because it talks about shalom in the midst of much turmoil. And that's the story of Esther. And Esther was a Jew living in Persia, modern-day Iran. The queen had not followed the king's instructions, and so it was time to find a new queen, and they had a beauty contest. She won, became the new queen. But in the meantime, the man who was second in command, Haman, was very prejudiced against the Jews, almost like Hitler, and wanted to destroy them all for various reasons. And so he was plotting and bringing the king unaware into his plots to wipe out the Jews as a people. Mordecai, who was the uncle of Esther, hopefully you know the story, right? Learns of the plot, and he goes to Esther, and he says, you are in the right position. Who knows, but God has put you in this position for such a time as this. But if you don't act, shalom will be removed from you, and your family will be affected, and God will rise up someone else who will speak on our behalf. And Esther counted the cost, knew that if she entered in the king's presence without being summoned, could be death for her. She knew that she may not be able to change the king's mind, and maybe her people would be all wiped out, including her. And in the midst of all that turmoil and struggle, she enters into a decision to follow shalom and makes a statement, if I perish, I perish. So shalom from a very different kind of perspective. And then there's the writers of the prophets who were writing about shalom. And a number of them make some comments, but in particular I just want to read one segment. And again, we just passed the Christmas season, and you may have had this read during the Advent season from Isaiah chapter 11, where it says, the wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear, their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. The infant will play near the hole of the cobra, and the young child will put his hand into the viper's nest. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. A vision for the future for shalom, because sometimes we think of shalom in the present, but shalom is the here and the not yet. Then we come to the New Testament. And the New Testament has a different context. The context here is the Roman Empire has taken over. And no matter where you turn, the empire is present. And the empire had a Latin term called Pax Romana, which meant Roman peace. Roman peace came at the end of a sword. And after all the battles had been fought, and after Rome had won everything, they had brought peace, and they kept peace through violence. And that was the world's understanding of peace. But within that context, the land of Israel, the Palestine, they still had their language. And they still had their understanding of peace. But now there's a new language, there's another language that is impacting them, and that's the Greek language. In the Greek language, the word for peace there is Irene. We don't have any Irenes here today, but if you see an Irene, go up and greet her and bless her with shalom. But in the context of Rome, the context of the Greek influence of philosophy, come the writers of the New Testament, also with their understanding of the Hebrew writings. And there at the beginning of it, we have the story of Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist. And there, as he is bringing his message, after John the Baptist is born, I've lost my notes here. He talks about, he makes a statement, "By the tender mercy of our God, the dawn from on high will break upon us, to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace." The announcement of the Prince of Peace is what he was bringing. The angels appeared on the night that Jesus was born. Glory to God in the highest, and peace on earth towards all people, is what they declared. And Christ, his whole ministry was about bringing peace. He called us to be peacemakers. And that through him, God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or heaven, by making peace through the blood of the cross of Christ. And so Jesus came, Ephesians tells us, to proclaim peace to you who are far off and to those who were near. Peace of the heart, peace of the mind. And then we are called to be people who bring peace. And that we would be agents of peace, and that we would demonstrate peace because of the fruit of the Spirit that is there within us. And as we look towards the end with Revelation, that we are headed towards a time of peace where the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords will reign and will be at his throne, the Lamb of God. So shalom was meant to be this blessing. And so we should be people who bring about blessings. And for example, we would say to someone, "I desire for you to have good health and a strong body. I wish for you an abundance of wisdom. I bless you with a sound mind and well-balanced emotions. May your family bring you great joy and happiness. I wish for you strong, healthy relationships with family and friends. I bless you with success in your career. I hope your finances overflow with more than enough. I pray for you to have a reputation of high regard among your community. And may God look upon you with favor and kindness." That is a blessing of shalom that we can offer to people. And yet we still live in the now and the not yet, as members of God's community and members partaking in the ministry of Yonge Street Mission. So first of all, we look at ourselves and discovery of the inner peace. And this ties in again to last month's presentation on Imago Dei, because that's the beginning of peace, in coming to peace with who I am as an individual and being able to accept myself for who I am, still recognizing that there is room for transformation and change that needs to take place. But can I be at peace with myself? And yes, we will deal with situations in life. We will have our crisis moments that are inner watersheds. But we will come to a realization that even though part of us has been rejected, and that our past may haunt us, that we can still have a self-acceptance, that there is goodness within each one of us. And that comes in connection with, do we have peace with God? And how do we attain that peace with God within our being? Through Christ. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. You know the verse. God has a desire to have wholeness with us, to have shalom with us. And God has made all the efforts to remove all the roadblocks so that we would have peace with God. So we would experience the wholeness of the relationship of being with God. And so when Paul writes about the unsearchable riches of Christ, that wishes that you would discover those unsearchable riches, that they are available to us as we work to develop that relationship that we have with God. And our life expands and moves and gets bigger and bigger and beyond anything we could possibly imagine. And the love of God then becomes a part of us as we then move out and begin to express it to others. The now and not yet, though not just inwardly, but looking outwardly. What do we want for the communities that we serve? What is it? How does peace, this understanding of wholeness, impact the ministry that we are involved in? And so, looking at the life of Christ and some of the stories that are there, I pulled out 3 different stories that give us 3 steps towards this understanding of the ministry that God has called us to, the ministry of peace. And the first one is the story, is the one that teaches us how to feel. So after his death and resurrection, first he appeared to Mary, and then there's the story of him appearing to 2 men on the road to Emmaus. And then these 2 men go back to Jerusalem, and they're sharing the story with all the disciples, and they're in a locked room. And it says there that Jesus appeared to them. While they were talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." And the next line says, they were startled and terrified. Many in the communities that we serve could be described as startled and terrified. Victimization does that to people. Robert Schreiter writes, he says, "Only those who have suffered, those who carry around the memory of pain in their bodies, know how strong the yearning is for peace and how far away peace can seem to be." And our ministry at the start is a ministry of feeling, to understand the pain that they have gone through, that we would hear the cries of the suffering and weep with them, that we would demonstrate compassion. And compassion, in its simple Latin form, simply means to suffer with. And we must learn to keep our hearts sensitive and not give in to allowing our heart to harden over time of hearing story after story. The second step then, after being able to express the feeling, is that we would develop the ability to listen. And in John chapter 5, there's the story of when Jesus met the crippled man at the pool of Bethsaida. And Jesus asked him, I love this question, "Do you want to be whole? Do you want to be made well?" The implication here is that not all people are ready at every moment to be made whole. We cannot force people into transformational programs, but there's an acquired skill to being aware of to when a person is ready to bring change in their life. And Jesus stops and listens to the man's story and lets him describe his situation. And when we stop and listen, we will learn when to take action and when not to. And timing is key in the ministry of transformation. I did it again. That's the third time I've been in this presentation. The third step then, moving along, is to respond. And in Matthew chapter 20, there's a story of the 2 blind men as Jesus is going on the road to Jericho. And they're calling out to Jesus, "Son of David, have mercy on us." And Jesus goes and hears them, and he goes to them, and he asks this question. Wouldn't you love Jesus to ask you this question? What do you want me to do for you? See, Jesus didn't set the agenda. He left it open for them to name their concerns. And so too it is with us. We may think that we already know the issues in people's lives. And so we are ready before they are sometimes to see transformation in their life. But it's important to let them name their concerns. And then our response should be to follow how Jesus responds. It says, there Jesus, moved with compassion, he touched their eyes. When people express a desire for transformation, we then gently reveal to them a vision for peace in their life. Not all is right with their world, but together we can dream, and together we can move step by step towards wholeness and away from violence and pain. And like Jesus, we can offer to be calming influence in people's lives. And that we would be agents or carriers of shalom and the fulfillment of Isaiah's words when he says, how beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of the messenger who announces peace, who brings good news, who announces salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. So we live in a city that is the world-class city. Just one of the reports that came out recently again. Someone's got a phone going on. I think somebody really wants to get a hold of whoever owns that phone. I think it's the third time it's been ringing. Just another report came out and said that Toronto was in the top 10 world-class cities. In fact, there were two reports. One of them named us as number 2. We become a center for trade and commerce. Our institutions, such as our universities and hospitals, are leaders in their fields. We have a very low crime rate for a city this size. Outsiders wonder where our ghettos are. It's a city well known for multiculturalism and how it's worked thus far. And yet we as citizens also know the weaknesses of our city. After all, we are Canadian. We are ones who are insecure and self-doubting and sometimes never see the goodness that is there. I could do so much more. But shalom is a state of wholeness and completeness that's possessed by a person or a group that includes good health, prosperity, security, justice, and a deep spiritual contentment. Again, going back to the Old Testament, one of the stories there is the story of Jeremiah. And during Jeremiah's time, the nation of Judah was taken captive by the Babylonians. They took all the people who had something to offer the nation of Babylon. They took them back to Babylon. So if you were an accountant, if you were a blacksmith, if you had a skill and ability, you got taken to Babylon. And all those that were left were the poor, the uneducated, the sick, the lame, and the old. And yet those who were taken captive wanted to return back to home. They wanted to taste the fruits of their land. They wanted to eat their food. They wanted to speak their language. And so we have the psalmist writing, by the rivers of Babylon, we wept, as we mourned for our city of Jerusalem. Their desire was so great to go. And so a false prophet arose and he said, don't worry, by this time next year, you'll be back in Jerusalem and enjoying the fruits of your labor. And Jeremiah said, remember, it's a 70-year exile. And then he wrote a letter from God to the people. And in that letter, in chapter 29 of Jeremiah, it says there, to the people whom I have sent to exile in Babylon, God had sent them to exile. He says to them, build homes, plant vineyards, plant gardens, marry, have children, give your children in marriage, and seek the welfare of the city that I have sent you off into exile. For as the city prospers, so too will you. So our ministry is that of seeking the welfare of the city, and that we could bring about change in our city. That we would be ones who would bring about shalom. Over the last year, YSM has worked at developing a list of the factors that influence an individual's ability to achieve transformation. And you've seen this in some of the presentations. We talk about connection, education, equality, wellness, and worldview. These are all those characteristics that we are aiming towards building into people so they would experience wholeness in their life. There's another word on the list that we haven't put on there yet, but we do anyways. And that's the seeking of beauty, and bringing in the arts, where people can express joy and express their emotions and experience the goodness of life. But it is still a vision of shalom that is the now and not yet. And so we have Isaiah chapter 65. Behold, I will create a new heavens and a new earth. The former things will not be remembered, nor will they come to mind. But be glad and rejoice forever in what I will create. For I will create Jerusalem to be a delight and its people a joy. I will rejoice over Jerusalem and take delight in my people. And here's that vision for the new city. The sound of weeping and of crying will be heard in it no more. Never again will there be in it an infant who lives but a few days. And now and the not yet. Never again will there be an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not live out his years. He who dies at 100 will be thought a mere youth. He who fails to reach 100 will be considered accursed. They will build houses and dwell in them. They will plant vineyards and eat their fruit. No longer will they build houses and others live in them, or plant and others eat. It continues on. So look at this new Jerusalem. Public celebrations and happiness and joy. Public health for children and seniors. A housing program where housing is for all. A food policy where there's food for all. Family support systems. Economic development and employment programs. Relationship with God. And the absence of violence. This is the goal of the New Jerusalem. This is what we have our sights on. This is what we're aiming towards. And it's so close and yet so far away. And so we are working towards advancing the goals of that New Jerusalem. And yet it's just beyond our reach. And so we have programs that are all taking place. And I started working on a list, and then I emailed Jeannie to get a more complete list. And when I looked at her list, I thought, I can't get all that in one slide or 2 slides or 10 slides. There's so many different things that are happening here within YSM. I'm just going to mention a few. But one of our staff members, when we were talking about this earlier, suggested that we should have the image of a tapestry, colorful, complex, and intricate, to express shalom at YSM. And so some of the things that we are doing, we will work towards building a flourishing community economy. We will work towards developing further employment opportunities and providing access to food and health care. We will help people find affordable and adequate housing. We will be at the table participating in the city strategy for poverty reduction. We will continue to work with local BIAs to form and develop vibrant business communities that employ neighborhood residents. We will continue to encourage positive participation of women on community councils, and we will work with other agencies to form strategic partnerships that will move to individuals and communities towards further transformation. That's just a few of the things that Angie was mentioning earlier on. That is our working towards bringing about shalom. But we have one other symbol that I'd like to share in wrapping up, and that's the symbol that is real and concrete, yet symbolic and visionary. And that's the Dreamers Peace Garden, situated in the front of the Christian Resource Center, CRC, in Regent Park. It's been in Regent Park since 2005. And the Dreamers are a group of mothers whose sons have been killed. Their vision is not only to address their grief, but also to get at the underlying causes and conditions that have led to the death of their children. They will also work to educate youth and explore options to stop violence through visitation and speaking engagements to youth. The area features benches and flowers and a stone with a plaque commemorating those who have died and pointing to a more hopeful future. Like these mothers, let us keep dreaming of what Toronto could be like, and let's keep working towards that future. Shalom. Shalom.